Ladies and gentlemen, friends and colleagues, brothers and sisters, anybody else whom I've forgotten. My name's Dan Smith. I'm director of the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, and I'm really delighted and honored to welcome you to the fourth edition, so to speak, of the Stockholm Forum on Peace and Development. Those of you who've been here before know that it used to be called the Stockholm Forum on Security and Development. We've renamed it, and the renaming is not a frivolous or a flippant one. I believe in concepts like human security, food security, water security, livelihood security, the security and safety of ordinary people. But when you use the word security by itself, it comes with a baggage. So often it means to people hard security, military security. And it's time really that we talked very straightforwardly and openly. The world is in an insecure situation, and what we need is more commitment to achieving peace by peaceful means. This forum, this discussion about the nexus between security and development, peace and development, is part of that conversation to be had. I'm going to pass over in a moment to two foreign ministers. The foreign ministry is we have worked very closely with to co-convene, co-organize, co-present this event. I just have a few technical housekeeping type of things which I need to tell you. One is to do with the Wi-Fi. The Wi-Fi is not what you were told in the pre-conference material and that's in your folder and everything. It's what you see up there, MB_guest, and the password is conference, spelt as you see it. Can I ask you, similarly technical thing, can I ask you to make sure that your phones are on silent? There are a few things which are more annoying than for a speaker being interrupted by a phone singing at us. And thirdly, just one quick part of the arrangements for today. Dinner is at 6 o'clock. It's out-of-town guests are invited to dinner at the Nobel Museum. The boat leaves at 6, so don't be dawdling. The boat leaves from outside. There'll be people there. There'll be people pointing the way. Don't dawdle. Boats leave when they leave. After the boat has left, it's kind of complex to get on it. So make sure you're on time. All of that said, once again, a very warm welcome to the event. Stockholm has behaved itself wonderfully. Last week it was snowing. This week it's spring, and you can dream, if you like, if you're out of town, that it's always like this. On with the event. I would like, first of all, to ask the Minister for Foreign Affairs, Margot Wallström, to make her opening remarks. Margot, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much, ministers, excellencies, dear friends. It's a true privilege and an honor for me to welcome you all to Stockholm, showing off, as you heard, and to this fourth annual Stockholm Forum on Peace and Development. And first of all, let me thank SIPRI for having established this forum as a meaningful and important new tradition. Unfortunately, the reasons for us to gather around these issues of peace and development remain ever so urgent. Since our task is so important, I am particularly happy to see such broad participation and great knowledge and experience is now gathered here today. We are privileged with the presence of Vadim Chernish, Minister of Temporary Occupied Territories and IDPs from Ukraine. We are happy to have Momodou Kargbo, Minister of Finance from Sierra Leone, co-chair of the International Dialogue on Peace Building and State Building. Axel Addy, Minister of Commerce and Industry from Liberia. Deka Yassin, Minister for Women's Affairs and Human Rights from Somalia. And Dr. Hanan Ashrawi, PLO Executive Committee member and PLC member. In addition, we have colleagues here from a number of influential think tanks and civil society groups, from around the world. We have people here from institutions such as the World Bank, the United Nations, and from regional bodies, not least the African Union. A warm welcome to all of you. And the theme of this year's forum is highly relevant. Frankly, asking ourselves what works is the honest recognition that we collectively need to redouble our efforts to build inclusive societies, prevent violent conflicts, and sustain peace. As I said before, sadly, we meet again at a time of great unrest. Ongoing developments in Syria, Yemen, South Sudan, Afghanistan and elsewhere have resulted in the largest humanitarian crisis in modern history. And conflicts are not only increasing in numbers, but also becoming more complex and more violent. Yet there is promise. Last year's inclusive peace agreement in Colombia may bring sustainable peace to a once conflict-ridden, since many decades, nation. Also in Somalia, the peaceful presidential election was the result of successful state and peace-building efforts and an effective cooperation between Somalia and its international partners. There is a new resolve in the international community to make sustaining peace a priority. But we need to move from UN lingo to practical deeds. And I see the need for improvement in three areas. First, politically. And we need to forge a new political consensus about this that puts conflict prevention and sustaining peace at the center of our efforts. And isn't it amazing that after all these years, this is something new to say that we should focus on conflict prevention in the United Nations. But that was really the impression also when we, as new members of the Security Council, put it on the agenda during our first month, also being in the chair. Second, practically, because we need to improve the capacity of the whole multilateral system to work together across organizations. Mandates and also areas of responsibility to address the root causes and drivers of conflict. So we need to ask ourselves what works and be brave enough to answer also truthfully. And thirdly, we have to change financially what we do because we need to ensure that there is predictable and sustainable financing for prevention and sustaining peace. And investing in prevention is not only morally right, it's a smart, economically sound and sustainable thing to do. However, in addition to this, we must urgently give increased attention to the link between climate change and security. And the Security Council recently made a visit to the Lake Chad region. And I want to just read to you what was the summary of that, and the impressions from that visit, because I think it's interesting. They said, during the visit, Council members witnessed firsthand how the lake is disappearing due to lack of rainfall, having shrunk by 90% since the late 70s. Lake Chad is dying and a main driver of instability. And this is what the president told the visiting delegation. They met with nomadic herdsmen who had been forced to move into new areas, causing conflict over land with local landowners. They also met farmers and fishermen who had seen their livelihoods destroyed, making extremist ideologies increasingly attractive, especially among youth. So the link between climate change and insecurity in the Lake Chad region was evident. And following up to that, the Security Council adopted Resolution 2349, which made a clear reference to the role of climate change as a risk multiplier and as a source contributing to the instability in the Lake Chad region. This was for the first time that this is now acknowledged. And the urgent humanitarian crisis in a country also like Somalia also reflects those critical linkages. So it is important that we continue to improve reporting mechanisms. Exactly what should we check at the local level and in the field? How can the UN agencies report back to the Security Council in a proper way as to warn that this will happen also as a threat to security if we don't take action? Is this for the Security Council to do? That's the debate that we're having right now. How do we gather the knowledge and expertise to be able to do that? I think the UN system also needs an institutional home for this issue where an integrated approach can be used. And we also support the appointment of a high-level representative on climate and security. So, ladies and gentlemen, sorry for being a bit long about this, but I find it extremely important and critical. This forum is a unique opportunity to have frank and open discussions on contemporary peace building. And we need to learn from collective both successes and failures. And I'm proud to represent a feminist foreign policy that aims to build international political momentum in support of effective and inclusive conflict prevention. Minister Levin and I are therefore happy to host this forum together with SIPRI. And while SIPRI for decades has been a world-class think tank on disarmament and non-proliferation, we are pleased that this is now also developing a unique niche with a broader agenda of peace and development. And on that note, Minister Levin and I would like to once again express our deepest gratitude to SIPRI for all their hard work in preparing this forum, and also thank the outgoing chair of SIPRI, Ambassador Sven-Ola Pettersson, and warmly welcome the incoming chair, Ambassador Jan Eliasson. We are indeed looking forward to a continued fruitful cooperation. So, ladies and gentlemen, over the next 2 days, you will discuss the future of peacekeeping operations, how to ensure inclusive peace processes, the complexity of violence, the humanitarian development nexus, and much more. And I, for one, am very much looking forward to these discussions, and I'm sure it will assist us in advancing sound policy and also ensure that no one is left behind. Thank you for being here, and all the best for coming discussions. Thank you.
So, thank you very much, Margot, for that. I mean, for the analysis, for the explanation, for the warm words, nice, kind words about SIPRI as well. And like you, I value so much the cooperation that we from SIPRI have been having with the Foreign Ministry over this event and over other issues, including climate change and security, which you highlighted. Can I now ask Minister Isabella Lövin, Minister for Development and indeed Climate Change, to make her opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. And ladies and gentlemen, excellencies, I'm also truly honored to stand here before you and give you some opening remarks. First, a quotation. I've learned a trade that I will apply for the rest of my life, although I'm a woman. These words were from the student Sabrine Abdallah Mohammed in Mogadishu, and she wants to become a construction worker. 5 months ago, I met her during my second visit to Somalia, and I saw her in a one-stop youth center just by the Indian Ocean in the middle of the city of Mogadishu. Now, before the war, Mogadishu was known as the white pearl of the Indian Ocean. With its white style, Italian palaces, its Catholic dome, its mosque, and its Arch of Triumph, it was really something splendid. But Sabrine never saw that Mogadishu. She was born after the war broke out in 1991, and she's only seen and she has grown up in a city completely in ruins. Walls full of gun holes, the streets full of rubble and men with guns, and the white has turned grey as in dust. She never went to school, she never had a normal life. But when I met her at this Center for Young People, where they taught vocational skills, life skills, and build your own businesses training, she was absolutely beaming with pride and with joy. She showed me a floor tile of concrete that was painted in green and red. And she had done that herself. She said that this work that she was learning as a construction worker was not only about her future, it was the future of Somalia. And now she felt that she was part of the future of Somalia. You know, she said, when I help rebuilding Mogadishu, that brings hope to young people. We must take our destiny into our own hands, and this tile will build Mogadishu, and it will build peace. Wow. I've never heard something that concrete, and how to explain how we need to work in sustaining peace and including young people. Peace building, sustaining peace, what works? That's the title of these seminars and this year's CPRIS conference. Well, we know what works. We need inclusive politics, we need security, we need rule of law, we need economic development, and we need service delivery to people, and we need wealth distribution. And what I just said now is nothing that I invented, but these are the pillars, the peace building and state building pillars of the New Deal for fragile states. And it's not even a new deal, it's something that we know and we worked with for very many years. And it's very simple, but it's also very, very difficult. But we know now that nothing can be more important than sustaining peace and preventing conflict from reappearing. For the young men and women in Mogadishu, international support for the transition underway in Somalia really, really matters. And Somalia, with its newly and successfully performed elections, are now an example of a fragile country finally going in the right direction. And I warmly welcome the new Minister of Women's Affairs and Human Rights, which has now entered into the election. This gives us hope. With the right support and with the right leadership, peace building is possible. 1 year ago, at a meeting with the International Dialogue on Peace Building and State Building preceding this very forum here in Stockholm, donors and fragile states adopted the Stockholm Declaration on Addressing Fragility and Building Peace in a Changing World. In this declaration, we committed to addressing the root causes of fragility, conflict, and violence. We also committed to implementing the New Deal principles in the implementation of the 2030 Agenda. We also committed to using development aids in more innovative ways to better respond to protracted crisis and to create wider and stronger partnerships. Since then, the UN Sustaining Peace Resolution has also been adopted, aiming at preventing violent conflict, addressing root causes, and moving towards recovery, reconstruction, and development. It also relates to human rights, peace, and security, and sustainable development in a mutually reinforcing way. And I'm convinced that this needs to be at the very center of development and of the Agenda 2030. Because the facts are clear to us. We know that more and more poverty is concentrated in fragile and conflict-affected states. We also know that the conflict-affected states and the fragile states, almost none of them have achieved any of the Millennium Development Goals. We're painfully aware of the consequences of violent conflict, the highest numbers of refugees since the Second World War, and alarms of famine in the scale never seen before since the creation of the United Nations. That's happening right now. Ministers, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it's a privilege and an honor to welcome you here to the Stockholm Forum on Peace and Development. If we're serious about our commitments to address fragility, we need to develop our ways of working and develop our partnership. different actors in the international community urgently have to change behavior and work closer together in new ways. Political will is key and desperately needed at all levels. This is why we've chosen the theme, Sustaining Peace, What Works. What we do and how we do it makes difference. During my many visits in fragile contexts, I've seen for myself what's working on the country level and what has not. We know that in order to promote lasting solutions to protracted crisis, a long-term perspective needs to be applied at the very beginning of an intervention. We know that if we work early on together and use political, security, and development efforts together for a common goal, we have a greater chance. If we start from the national level with national ownership and make efforts to include all relevant stakeholders, not least women and youth, we are better equipped to realize sustaining peace, sustained development, and leaving no one behind. This is why the Stockholm Forum on Peace and Development is such an important arena for exchange of experiences, stimulating discussion, and also a valuable opportunity to elaborate new modalities and tools to promote sustaining peace. So, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, friends, let's not forget about Sabrine Abdallah Mohammed and her dream of a future out of fragility. Her dream must come true. And let's hope that our discussions here, these coming 2 days, can contribute in the best possible way, and I'm convinced that we can. Thank you.
Again, Isabella, I want to thank you very much, both for the good cooperation we've had for your analysis and for bringing the kind of the human reality of this lingo, sustaining peace, bringing it right to us. You talked about stimulating discussion and exchanging experience and knowledge, and let's start with that straight away. We have a panel to kick us off. Can I ask the panelists to join me up here on the platform? Joining Ministers Wallström and Levin. You probably recognize them all, but in any case, and you've got the little biogs in the folder, but Hanna Shrawi, who's Executive Committee member of the Palestine Liberation Organization. Jan Eliasson, who's my new boss, incoming chair of the governing board of SIPRI. Minister, why don't you come along here? Uri Traore, who is activist and researcher scholar from Mali, now based in Senegal. And I don't want to block the view to Minister Mamadou Kagbu, sitting right here, the Minister for Finance and Economic Development of Sierra Leone. And as you can see, it's a crowded panel, so crowded there's no place for me to sit, so I'm going to stand.
We can make room.
I prefer to stand here and loom over you with authority.
Oh, okay.
Because one of the things about crowded
tactical.
panels is there's not that much time.
That's water.
So I'm not going to make a long introduction at all. We know what our task is here. It is to figure out what works for sustaining peace. This is
That would be nice.
a troubled and a troubling time. Today's challenges and opportunities are shaped by worrisome developments and tragic events, which we see in the news all around us. But they're also shaped by many positive factors, including international commitments that were made during 2015, the SDGs and the Paris Climate Change Agreement. And international agreements like the Iran nuclear deal and like the Colombia Peace Agreement show what is possible when people are moving and working together. So this is the context, this is the platform for working together to sustain peace. So I'm going to ask each panelist for some comments and some thoughts about this. I may have a chance to follow up. I may have a chance, depending on how much time they take, to ask for each to comment on the other from time to time. And I hope that there will be a possibility to invite for questions from the floor. May I begin, Margot, with you? Sweden is now a member of the UN Security Council. This is a powerful forum. This is a platform. what is it that it's possible to do to move the agenda of sustaining peace forward using the Security Council membership?
We started by putting it highest up on the agenda also when we took our seat in the Security Council. And we used the first month to establish that as a recurrent theme in everything we do. And that was also a way to help the new Secretary General off to a good start, because this is one of his priorities as well. Conflict prevention, sustaining peace, getting the whole system to work as one, all of it, but putting it into practice. And I think it has a lot to do with how you report from the field to headquarters. It is a lot about how you put an end to working in silos, and of course to make sure that there is expectations, that we meet expectations from ordinary citizens, like the example that Isabella gave. And that is, I think that the UN system must be at the core of all this work. And we have to work together and understand that that is really an obligation. I was so shocked when I worked as an SRSG and went to the DRC the first time. And I thought it was a given thing that all the organizations that worked on that specific task that I had on conflict-related sexual violence, that they would meet regularly to talk about what do you do, how can we complement, how do we cooperate. But that was not at all natural. It was actually the first time that we brought those actors together in that part of the DRC. And I think that demonstrates that there is a lot more to do. And I think already the UN has taken it on in a different way.
So that was going to be my next question, was to ask you, is it too early to be asking our question of the day, what works? I mean, are there early achievements that you feel you can see already on this?
I think we stand a fantastic chance with the new Secretary General, who is organizing work in a different way, and with a clear political will expressed also in the way that he plans the activities. I think the Agenda 2030, the fact that we have all the normative frameworks are there. So now it's about implementation. So that's why we need to ask ourselves what works and how do we put that into practice, because we know a lot already since decades back. We know what works and what does not work. So now let's put it into deeds.
And we look at the world, and when we are worrying about security and insecurity at the moment, and we look at the headlines, they're not going to be about what is happening so much in fragile countries. It's about Syria. It's about perhaps Yemen. It's certainly about DPRK, the nuclear weapons, the naval exercises, and so on. To what extent do those, the global security issues get in the way of working on these fragile state questions? And to what extent can actually the UN system and people who are working together on this kind of motor on that, regardless of that overarching problems or whatever?
No, but that is exactly the work of the United Nations through all, not least the peacekeeping operations, but also how the whole system has to keep up that work, to make sure that the Security Council is also reminded that most of these conflicts fall back into violent clashes or violence, or back into war, if we don't sustain the development efforts and all those things that we know will provide a much better platform for the future. So this is exactly why the reporting has to be of such a nature that it helps the Security Council to sustain peace, and the whole UN system to sustain peace. So not let the issues of the day destroy that kind of basic work. But that's also the trick. And unfortunately, we are producing now in Sweden as one of 2 countries in the world that make public our country reports on human rights, democracy, and rule of law. And we have put together 135 of these reports, and we are making them public. It paints a very dark picture, I'm sorry to say. Because if the polar bear on that shrinking ice block has been the symbol of climate change, I must say that now it's maybe a defender of human rights and women's rights that will stand very alone, maybe in front of a gun even, or put in jail. That will be the symbol of what is happening to the world right now. And that is it's very sad and very, very serious. So we have a lot to do, and we have to mobilize all the good forces now and democratic forces to change that.
I think that question of the shrinking space and how to stop it from shrinking further around peace work and human rights work is crucial. Can I move on to Minister Kagbo from Sierra Leone? The whole issue of the UN moving forward, keeping working on the SDGs, keeping working on climate change agreements and so on. It's not simply about an international system working. It's also about individual governments pushing the agenda forward themselves. So can you talk to us a little bit about that and how that looks and what you do in Sierra Leone to push that SDG agenda forward?
Okay. At the beginning of the MDGs, my country was still embroiled in the civil war.
Right.
So we missed most of it. It had started. By the time the civil war ended, we were 3-4 years into the MDGs. So we spent the best part of the period playing catch-up. Not so for the SDGs, because some peace had returned to the country, and therefore we had time to plan. And in 2012, when the new government came in, which I belong to, we established our plan. We called it the Agenda for Prosperity. That was to cover up to 2019. And that agenda comprised of 8 pillars. And what we have done is, for all the SDGs, we have mainstreamed them into each of those 8 pillars. For example, pillar number 1 in the Agenda for Prosperity is diversification of the economy. This links directly to the goal of poverty reduction, reducing poverty. Because when you diversify the economy, you're essentially talking about creating considerable opportunities, incomes. And when people have incomes, they have jobs. In fact, for me, the most important social program in the job, I spell J-O-B. In the world, I spell J-O-B. When you have a job, that's the most important social program. So this is how we have, that is first stage in terms of how we are handling it. And from that point, that is mainstream government up there. And from that there, we have cascaded it downstairs. So the next level was in the budget. So each budget addresses those issues, particularly the issue of education and health. These are the fundamentals to the development of the society. And each budget tries to address those 2 key issues throughout this planning period. And from that point, another thing which we did was we simplified the SDGs so that it becomes easy for society to understand, the common man, the ordinary person. You can discuss it at various levels, the church council, the Muslim council. These documents are made available to them, and they are able to read, they are able to understand. That's not where we have ended it. And the previous minister had a strong background on civil society organization. So that is another angle where we have pushed it. So for us in Sierra Leone, the SDGs is like, to some extent, for the Minister of Finance, it's like some bread and butter. Mm-hmm. Each time, like as I head home now, we think about budget, 2018 budget, and you want to hear the fights. this percentage must be done. Although we don't like it, this percentage must go to education. This percent of the budget must go to health. This percentage of the budget must go to food production. And it seemed to be working. And that is how we have addressed this issue of the SDGs, how we are localizing them, and how we are pushing that agenda forward, not to be left behind again as is happening in the MDGs.
And I think, I mean, within what you're saying, one of the things that I found most striking was that you used the expression that you have simplified the SDGs. Because it is a big, complex architecture. I mean, it had to be in order to accomplish, everything that is wanted. It's umpteen goals, and then it's umpteen times 10 targets, and then it's heaven knows how many indicators. So simplifying that, bringing that down, I think it's crucial. I wanted to ask you as a follow-up to what you've just said about what Sierra Leone does with the SDGs. It's also based on partnership. And Sierra Leone has taken an important role as being co-chair of the international dialogue and the G7+, supporting the New Deal and so on. And the New Deal was meant to be always a new relationship between donor governments and governments of fragile states. So what do you look for from a donor such as Sweden?
Okay. Let me start by saying I'm wearing a badge, and it says G7+. It's a group of 20 countries, very vulnerable, coming out of war. And they are classified as very vulnerable, very fragile. And as Minister of Finance, the key for me, when you use those two words, is about revenue generation.
Right.
Domestic, in particular, domestic revenue generation, which, given that our institutions have been cracked up because of the war, followed by Ebola, following the price, investors left. So we have a really difficult opportunity of domestic revenue generation. This is what we look to our partners to support the development effort. And with it comes all the challenges. And so in the end, it is with the partner is how we walk the walk. What to do, when to do, and how to do it is very critical, and that's the whole thing about the New Deal. That is the bottom line of the New Deal. What is being said in the New Deal is not essentially too new.
No.
We are just taking a second look, admitting mistakes had been made in the past, but in G7+, we say there is no peace without development, and there is no development without peace. And so the two, it's like walking, left, right, left, right. The two have got to go in the same, at some pace, and therefore, the development partners and the countries that are fragile, or whatever is the title, have to work together, have to revisit, have to take a new look, and that's the whole notion of the New Deal.
Yeah, and that working together and that sense of a partnership, I think, was intended to be something that was different from the old donor-beneficiary relationship. And I think that's really interesting. I want to move on now to Isabella Levin again. And on this theme of partnerships and coalitions, alliances, where does, seen from Stockholm, seen from here, where does Sweden find partners for the agenda that you want to push forward on the New Deal, on conflict prevention, on climate change and its impact upon insecurity? Where are those partnerships? Are new partners emerging? Tell us about it.
Well, basically, I think in 2015 with the Agenda 2030, we all had to start anew, looking on development and how to achieve the Agenda 2030. And it's not only about development aid, it's not only about traditional donors, but we actually have to make this work with policy coherence for development. We need to engage finance ministers. We need to engage the banks. We need to engage the business community. We need to engage everyone if we're going to achieve, let's say, eradicate poverty by 2030, or succeed on halting the worst effects of climate change. Then we need to get the business community on board. We need to have the right financial mechanisms in place to actually promote things that are sustainable and punish those that are not sustainable. We need to prevent tax evasion. We need to make sure that whoever invests in Sierra Leone or in Somalia or in any other fragile state will behave responsibly. And not evade taxes, not try to corrupt governments or whatever. So I think first answer to your question is, what are the new parties? I think within our own government, we've relaunched the policy coherence for development agenda, making sure that every ministry is working in a systematic way with plans for every ministry on how we're actually supporting sustainable development for globally, not only looking in stovepipes in our own government. That's number one. Number two, we're working very closely. We're co-chairs of the International Dialogue on Peace Building and State Building. I think the G7 plus group of fragile states is a shining example of how you can set the example and also share experiences among yourselves. And I think the fragile to fragile cooperation is really something that could be explored and also really set an example for how you can work. Because I noticed when I went to Somalia again, we had the secretary of the G7 plus countries there. He's from Afghanistan. Mm-hmm. When I spoke to the former government of Somalia, they were like taking some notes. But when he spoke, this is what happened in Afghanistan, this is how we did with the donors, they were all ears, like, okay. So you could really see that you could speak on the same level, you can speak the same language, and you can actually also avoid a lot of mistakes that have been done in the past. Then on the ground, I think we cannot emphasize enough that all the partners need to sit at the same table. We don't afford to have different agendas, different priorities, and not care about the country's own priorities. Because, if the example of Sierra Leone, so your predecessor as a finance minister, he always explained how Sierra Leone was doing very well economically until the Ebola crisis struck. And how come it struck in Sierra Leone? Because the health system was not developed enough. So all the investors that were flying into to Freetown and so on or in the region, they just left from one day to another. And that shows that we cannot only look at economic development, we need to look at the service delivery and the health services, we need to look at security, because if there's terrorism or instability, no one wants to go there and invest anyway. We also need to look at inclusive politics, because that is also a basis for long-term stability. And these are the pillars of the New Deal for fragile states, and that means we need to work with all the partners in every possible way all the time. That's not an easy answer, but that's what we need to do.
It's fair enough. It's a complex agenda,
yeah,
right, with many different components and items in it. It needs lots of partners and therefore lots of partnerships. But we know also about shrinking space for some of those people who should be partners. And we know that there are prejudices, there are views about how government should function, what the rights of government are, why let these NGOs into the conversation. What can a country like Sweden do that doesn't simply impose an agenda of inclusivity on a potential partner, and yet encourages an openness or an increase in the space? There's a dilemma there, and we're going to be talking about that, I think, during the next couple of days. Can you tease out some of the possibilities within that dilemma?
Okay, so that is, of course, a great concern on how we do that without imposing, let's say, Western values and so on. But we know that if women, for instance, participate in an economy, then the economy will grow immensely. And that's also, I mean, no country has ever been able to leave poverty without the rights of women and the rights of women to work and the sexual and reproductive health and rights, for instance. So that is key, and I think we need to really sit down and have a serious conversation and a dialogue on these matters, rather than imposing and I mean, as a minister of international development cooperation, I all the time get questions about conditionality on our development support. We should just cut aid to every single country where we're working, because there's abuse of human rights, of course, in every single country that we're working almost. So, but it doesn't work that way, and we try to support, of course, always the civil society and human rights workers and journalists and freedom of speech and all of that, while we're also trying to support the country's own system. But there needs to be always a balance there, and we can for sure not back off for our values on when it comes to human rights and women's rights and freedom of the press. So we don't back off from that. But I think we make a stronger case if we all share the same agenda, and if we really can prove that this is a way to success for most countries.
So I mean, so a big part of it is actually making the argument, is making the case, and then it is also being realistic about the navigation that you have to do between the different demands and pressures.
Absolutely. And I'd like to mention the World Bank here when we're sitting here, because I think the World Bank has really stepped up on its work in conflict-affected states recently, and introducing programs really going into the most difficult environments. And basically, if we're going to eradicate poverty, we need, and everyone knows that in this room, so it's superfluous almost to say, but we need to focus on the conflict-affected and the fragile states, because it's here where we're seeing those people left behind that we have promised to not leave behind. And I think the World Bank is also working now, trying to provide job opportunities and economic development for the millions of people that have been forced to flee from Syria and from other conflicts, and who are now more or less in a chronic state of being a refugee. And just this number, that, I mean, the years that are on average that a person is a refugee is now more than 20 years. I mean, people grow up without feeling that they have a future and they can't go back. So working on this, yes, you know all about that. But working on this is also working on conflict prevention, providing job opportunities to refugees, and making the new generation that is born in the state of refugee to have some hope for the future. That is also a way of working on conflict prevention.
If I turn to Uri now, if I can do. One of the issues that we deal with all the time is the distinction between short term and long term, the big goal and the here and now of the realities. And thinking about peace support operations, peacekeeping operations. How is it possible to reflect these kind of big and great goals of the sustainable development goals, or the sustaining peace framework, in the daily, the weekly, the monthly operations on the ground?
Okay. Yeah, thank you so much. And I can't help to notice that we have 4 women sitting at the stage. This is a new thinking.
And it works.
Yeah, I think that we have to try those new thinking. And also, I want to really apologize all the time I do that, because my language is usually not measured, and I think it's working for civil society for so long that I've never been part of the government or, those formal systems. I usually dismiss the term peacekeeping because there's no peace to keep. In the first place, when the peacekeeping forces are deployed, it's a mess. So there's no peace to keep. And so the peace support operation for me is a better term. But at the same time, if you look at even peace support operation, it's usually externally planned and implemented, and it's time-bound, and it's short-term, and it's cost-extensive. So how do we really sustain that? And I think the sustaining peace is not really a new concept. It's something we've been talking about since the 70s and so on. But again, we didn't have the courage to kind of really implement what we've been talking about all along. And if you look at the context of, low intensive, conflict and also fragile state, peacekeeping and peace support operation can be challenging. And I'm not saying that, I'm not trying to be so negative or pushing. We have seen the case of Sierra Leone, we have seen the case of Liberia, where it has contributed to ceasefire, separating, different fraction of the society fighting, and also paving the way for the transition. But again, the major challenge, I think, is the fact that it's planned from outside all the time and implementing. And sometimes, it mitigates those facts, but it kind of prolongs suffering sometimes. Because, the international community feel like, they are doing something. At the same time, people are not seeing the dividend of peace.
So let me ask you then what I think is the tough question to ask at that point. Is there the capacity within those fragile states or within the societies, the communities in those fragile states, to join in the planning of a peace support operation so that it doesn't become simply externally planned, but becomes something which is a shared enterprise between those who need it and those who can provide the resources?
Yes, usually we just always make the assumption that there's no capacity. And capacity of what? And we keep talking about capacity. The thing is, for those societies, they have survived because of their resilience. And that's a lot of capacity already. So the conversation is like, how do you come and say, I want to help you, how can I best help you? Can you really shave my head when I'm not here? No. So we have to involve them. It's not that, it's not that the place is a mess and think that they cannot be part of the conversation. They cannot be included because they have a certain resilience and already that is a capacity.
I think half the audience is still trying to get their head around that metaphor.
Those are crude African way of, but what I'm saying, you can't really take care of my hair if I'm not here.
No, absolutely.
Yes.
And that's all to the good. But I mean, there's also proof of what you're saying. For example, although it's often been criticized as an unwieldy process, the UN Peacebuilding Commission and the Peacebuilding Fund have tried to work in that kind of way, where they have, where they insist on a group coming together within the country that should also include civil society to generate the plan. So there is a lot of support in experience for that approach.
Yeah. So we should ask ourselves, is it enough? What else should we do? Is it working everywhere? And, we have seen now in Liberia, a lot of investment have been done there. And Liberia have really moved forward because if you see the country in 2005 and today you see it is like a completely, totally different place. But there is a panic now that UN is trying to phase out. ECOWAS even have requested that UN should reconsider this effort. So all the capacity building has been done in Liberia, but now we ask ourselves, is it enough? So these are some of the challenges. I hope I'm not too negative, or and that's not the essence. But
Well, I tell you what, to give you a chance, just in case you have been too negative, which I don't think you have, but just in case, let me again ask you the question of the day. So, what works? Don't tell me what hasn't worked.
Yeah.
But what can you see and put in front of us that has worked?
well, what has worked? I really, for instance, if you look at even the issue of women, this is something I can't even comprehend. What has worked is all the time if we involve women.
Yes.
And we involve the youth. The reality is women are half of, or more than half of the population in all the countries. And you've added to women, they are the majority of the population. And they are the one who, bear the brunt of all the suffering and so on. And places where they have involved women has really worked. And that's what we need to focus. Women don't need to negotiate for them to be part of a process that affects them. And we need to have clarity in that. And we don't need to negotiate that. We have to impose that. And these are some of the things we need to focus. Anywhere they have involved women, it has worked. But when you leave women and the youth behind, then we have a challenge.
This is why we have a feminist foreign policy,
Exactly,
Dan.
yeah.
This is exactly the thing.
And this is part
works,
of Isabella's answer to my question. It's what works. Inclusivity works. And arguments that inclusivity works can be evidence-based. I think that's really important. Hanan, I want to turn to you now. And we talk a lot, obviously, in big and general terms about goals and including about human rights. But also, peace building, I mean, even more security, but even peace building is a very pragmatic process. Yeah. And quite often, therefore, one finds, sadly, that statements about human rights or other good goals become kind of selectively blind in their implementation. And I think that, you have a lot of experience about that. And not so much to ask you to tell us about that experience, but rather, where do you see progress and where do you see regress on this? I mean, is the world, frankly put, is the world becoming more hypocritical or less hypocritical about human rights implementation?
Well, if you look at it in terms of the marriage between peacemaking and peace building, and having a comprehensive, integrated approach, not just the SDGs and not just the UN sort of plans and resolutions and visions, and if you imbue that with political will in order to have this integrated approach and to understand that peacemaking is not an abstract, verified process separate from not just development agenda, but human security and empowerment of disenfranchised and, internally fragile people, not just fragile states, then I think you can rectify that. But let me say frankly, from what I've seen, when peacemaking becomes a political process that falls within the trap of power politics, especially given the lack of accountability that we were talking about, then it means automatically that there is no recognition and effective instruments to deal with human rights. I'll give you one example. You wanted specific. When Yasser Arafat, who was the one revolutionary who made this transformation from, armed struggle to nation building and peacemaking, when he established the state security courts, I wrote a statement denouncing the state security courts because I felt these, and I called them the courts of night, of darkness. And I felt that they violated people's rights. And then the vice president of the US came to visit. And he particularly used that example to show that Yasser Arafat was committed to peace. Why? Because he has state security courts. Because he needed to set up a military security system in order to defend the security of Israel. So he was asked to violate his own people's rights in order to demonstrate that he cares about the security of the occupier. And now we find ourselves in a position where we are held responsible for the security of the occupation army, for the security of the settlers, the legal settlers, and anybody who doesn't do that is either a terrorist or you're not showing seriousness of intent and genuine commitment to peace. So incorporating, again, an asymmetry of power, absent any kind of accountability, and having this abstract system without this integrated approach and understanding the genuine substance and humanity involved in peacemaking and peace building, this is what leads to a situation like this, particularly when you have lack of political will on the part of the international community to make sure that there is a global rule of law. Not just rule of law within countries and nations, particularly given the definition of security, which we talked about.
Yeah.
Because security, when it is addressed in military terms, generally serves the stronger party, because they insist on their own security, while the weaker party should not have any kind of security, human, economic, territorial, in our case even in terms of identity and history and culture. We don't have it, because we're being negated, as Ilan Pape says, a displacement-replacement paradigm. So that kind, in a sense, works towards negating not just human security, but human rights in specific. And if you do not involve, as everybody has said, if you do not have an inclusive approach to own the peace agenda with all its components, developmental and human rights and, SDGs and everything else, then it just becomes an exercise of power, absent genuine engagement, genuine accountability, and the willingness to take risks, which Sweden has clearly demonstrated that it can.
So following up on that then, apart from saying, well, the international community should develop the will to enforce global rule of law. So apart from thinking of that at the generality,
yes,
what is there that could be done that begins to chip into that set of problems that you're talking about?
Well, I was thinking in terms of really having mechanisms for engagement and intervention.
Right.
Because if, as you said, if the resolutions and all the decisions and all the moves remain in New York, and if they remain the domain of people who are not wielding and exercising power, then of course that's not going to work. Then people who really need them and people who need to see them applied will not be able to see that. So you have to have a system of accountability. And I think that means that when we talk about human security, you have to stretch the bounds of sovereignty. Sovereignty does not mean giving the government the right to oppress its own people, for example. It doesn't mean giving the occupying power a free hand to enslave a whole nation. No, you question that and you engage, and there has to be a price to be paid. Now, generally, people say, yes, we adopt resolutions, that's the price, and so on. And sometimes selectively, people go to the ICC or ICJ very selectively. But without these mechanisms, without the will, I mean, I'm not saying just make it conditional. I'm saying, no, you have to engage and say, those who are wielding power, you do not have a free hand to oppress the weak. And for example, we had a meeting of the women before I came at home, and we said, maybe we should boycott any delegation that doesn't have women. Maybe we should boycott any negotiations that doesn't involve, although we were the only delegation that had women, but still we need women, not just symbolically, but also quantitatively and qualitatively. So maybe we shouldn't accept any elections list that doesn't have not just 30% women, but according to the UN Women, which I don't see here, 2030 should mean 50-50, right? And so these are ways in which you can concretely and actively make sure that this is an agenda that is implementable and owned by everybody comprehensively. Women and youth, yes, definitely. But also a system of intervention with the powerful, be it a government, a local government, be it an occupying power, or be it a neighboring state that is conducting proxy wars. What we've seen in Syria, you mentioned that briefly, is the most overwhelming human tragedy. Loss of life, loss of rights, total displacement, and without real intervention to understand that military intervention creates more hardship and more insecurity and more conflict and more extremism, you cannot solve not just Syria, but Libya and Yemen and everything else. There are no military solutions. So rescue security from military definitions.
Yeah.
I think that would also help.
Yes. I mean, I think it's very rich and it's providing a lot of themes for the discussion in the next couple of days about inclusivity, dialogue, the importance of mechanisms, what are real solutions and what are not real solutions. Jan, I want to turn to you now. I mean, you had a big role in the UN as the SDGs came through, as they were developed and agreed and so on. And one of the things they're about, which the minister talked about as well, Minister Kagbo, is the interdependence of peace and development. And where are the places, what are the issues where governments or international organizations, NGOs, whomever, can work most productively at the moment, do you think?
Well, first of all, I think we haven't quite realized what an enormously important achievement has been made by the introduction of the SDGs, the 2030 Agenda, and the Sustaining Peace concepts. I've been on the struggle to create something that broadens the definition of security for many years. But the fact that you now have two new tools in your hand, both as a nation but also as an in the international community, is a tremendous asset, which will help universality, which will help show that international cooperation is important for the nation, but also that national efforts are important for the security of the world. One of the best contributions that can be made to international security is to create safe and fair societies which maintain peace, peaceful societies, which maintain a policy of justice economically, and which maintains a policy of living up to human rights. And here we have these two new tools in our hand. And to your question, I think now you have done absolutely the right thing, the Foreign Ministry and you at CIPRI, great organization, by the way.
Welcome
You have
aboard.
done the right thing by bringing in the peace and security work together with development and human rights. And I have found during my many years in the UN and the Swedish Foreign Service that if you don't deal with all these three aspects at the same time, sustainable development, and I would say sustainable peace, and I hope one day we will have sustainable human rights, by the way, then it's like a building or like a chair with three legs, and one of them is off, and then the whole thing falls apart. And here is the big challenge. When you say the theme is sustaining peace, what works? Then I come to the key conclusion. Now is the time to organize. Now is the time to organize ourselves. This is a tremendously important tool for the UN, for instance, to bring the whole family together, to show that if they, as you said, Margaret, avoid the silos and work horizontally, and by that I don't mean go to sleep, but work across borders and lines, not only inside the UN family, but also opens up, as Isabella said, to the civil society, private sector, scientific community, you and me. Nobody can do everything, everybody can do something. If we don't mobilize now the good forces, we are in deep trouble, both as nations, I would say, and in the international community. We are at an historic juncture today where we can prove that the good international solution, like in climate, like in migration, is in the national interest. But do we have a big job to convince countries about that? Ask US Congress, for instance. whether they come to the conclusion that the climate agreement is a national interest. We have a long way to go. The Nordic countries are ahead. Congratulations to your initiative to strengthen the Nordic cooperation. But we can now, in all the planning, whether it is in the Security Council, UNDP, or elsewhere, Human Rights Council, we need to say, where are our friends in security, development, and human rights? To make sure that we have a stable system to take the next steps. We have to think now what will be done one day this horror in Syria is over, when this horror in Yemen is over. I think Sierra Leone has done great progress. You're on the right track. You've done extremely well. Liberia has done well. But I think we should now make sure that we organize ourselves so that the people in the security sector automatically bring in the development aspects. And you may have a struggle in the Security Council to do that, because far too many countries still, major powers and unfortunately also G77, consider many of the development efforts, and above all human rights, being in the domain of domestic affairs, and don't you intervene.
A luxury.
Now we have a unified UN with all the member states behind the SDGs, where you have goals 16 and 17, assuring the sustaining peace concept, access to justice, and strong institutions. Strong institutions is absolutely crucial. And you have sustaining peace. I was negotiating the Peace Building Commission 11 years ago. We couldn't get it through, or we had huge problems with the P5. Now you have unity in the General Assembly and Security Council, same text. So to you, you're on the absolute right track. Work on now practically how we really work horizontally, concretely, and insist that these three different dimensions have to be taken in from the beginning. Otherwise, the houses will crumble and fall apart.
So I'll come back to you in a moment, Jan, but I wanted to give both the ministers of the Swedish government a chance to comment on that. It's the time to organize, it's working horizontally, and it's in some senses, it's recognizing that geopolitics gets in the way of the progress that we want to make. And here is Sweden on the Security Council. It is actually quite a responsibility.
It is. But it was also a vote of confidence, actually, in our agenda, that we had 134 countries voting us in. So that is also gives us strength and self-confidence to work. And I think every day it started with Gambia. So that was also maybe an example of how you can do conflict prevention. It could have escalated or developed into violent clashes and not a powerful transfer of power in that country. And this is how you then have to make sure that you use all of the tools that we have available to us. So what we can state from this discussion is also that we have the normative framework. We have the ambitious goals established. We have a sort of global commitment to all of these fantastic ambitions. We have a climate change deal and all of that. We have experience. We actually know a lot about what works and what does not work. So we have both successes and failures. And now it's a matter of, I think, creating also ownership and accountability. And it has to be also at the local level. And this is where, yes, it works because women work. Women work so hard. We know that without women, as you said also, Isabella, we will not succeed. We stand a better chance if we involve them in everything from peace negotiations to peacekeeping and peace building. And that is absolutely crucial. And we also know it from an economic point of view. If women are not in the labor force, if they are not engaged, you will not reap the benefits of economic development and growth. So it's really getting to work, as you say. Now is the sort of the agenda. We have to just make sure that we follow up and do what we know is right. So it's not that we stand without experience or knowledge, but we have to put it together. And I would say, I think I did not answer properly to your first question, because why Yemen? Why Syria, why these issues are highest up on the agenda, political agenda, but also in the media attention, is because we have not done the homework, because we have not managed to see what happened with social unrest after many years of drought and moving people again in a certain direction and helping. So we did not see the first signs of what was going on. We did not intervene early enough, and we have not been able also to deal with, should I call it, the powerful men that are now sort of ruling so much of the world. And this is also very, very dangerous. And to continue to fight for exactly all the pillars in a sustainable development, including human rights, and making sure that the rule of law is well established. So, yeah, I think we have to get to work and create the expectations also because we need the drivers of a democracy, of people knowing that they can ask this from their leaders.
Mr. Kagor, getting to work. I mean, you said jobs, JOB. That's the starting point.
Yeah. I want to get back to the notion of peacekeeping. I thought I will not shut my mouth, because early in your presentation, you quickly moved away from military security to the other forms of security. And it's in that context that I talk about this peacekeeping. If we thought the soldiers were the only ones that brought peace in Sierra Leone, no, it's a mistake. Yeah. There were a lot of other, it was a holistic process that brought peace to Sierra Leone. Because first of all, the moment you had that kind of situation, one thing was clear: the army had become partisan, and obviously that's not what was at stake. You needed to create a proper foundation, and without that foundation, there can be all of what we're talking about cannot take place. So peace is always critical, and it has to be holistic, and everybody has to play his or her own parts in this whole process. But one thing I need to bring out, which you have also brought out, and that is the need to prevent conflict, not to allow it to start, because it shatters everything, and you have to start all over again. And that is critical to all of what we are talking.
Right.
And inside that prevention of conflict is not to allow, like our countries who are working out of conflict, to slide back.
Okay. Yeah.
You see, these are the critical things that we need to look about when we talk about peace these days. Reason being, we once had an economy that was galvanized, like 21%. The GDP was growing at 21%, unbelievable. Albeit it was a small GDP, but it was still growing at 21%. And then it looked like a miracle. But what we did not see was what was lying ahead. The market forces brought down the price of commodities, and the one commodity phenomenon came into being. We are an iron ore exporter, so the moment the prices fell, there was trouble.
Yeah.
And then added to that, a natural phenomenon occurred. Ebola walked into Sierra Leone. That we thought we were growing a strong economy, and all of a sudden, it emerged that the health infrastructure was nothing to cope with what had walked in. You see, so it is this unknown in an uncertain world that we now face today, that we really need to focus our attention on this New Deal, Agenda 2030, on how they fit and how we progress, and the need for our development partners to give the support. I call it understanding. There has to be proper understanding between the countries being helped and the development partners. And so we move away from provider
And recipient,
to a balanced relationship in which we talk to each other, we address issues, we have an understanding, and then considerable progress is made.
And then I think if we go to the point that you made, Jan, that the best way to build peace in the world is by building fair and peaceful societies. What is done to help build fair and peaceful societies is both the right thing to do, right? But it's also a contribution to peace and security worldwide. Right? So at a time when insecurity seems on the rise and therefore there's one lobby which is pressuring for more military expenditure, it could well be that you would think that in the medium to long term, the important way to contribute to a country's security, even to Sweden's security, is by contributing to building just and fair societies and building the foundations of that.
Well, my father was a labor union leader, and I was the first one to graduate from high school in the, well, I won't say in front of the ladies how many years ago. And I asked him, what was it that brought about this prosperous nation that we have? We had moved from a one-room to a two-room. I saw my first bathroom at age 11. So I asked, what was it that brought about this? And he said, three things, my son. We built, he wouldn't use the word infrastructure. He said we built railroads, roads, hospitals, schools, which constituted later a well-functioning public sector from the 30s onward. Secondly, we brought about a fair and strong education system, which made it possible for people like you, pointing to me, to get an education for free from grade 1 to university without paying one krona in tuition. And then thirdly, he said, we trusted the people who ran the cities and the counties and the government. We put good people in there. And damn it, if they ever were guilty of corruption or anything, we were there and they were on. We trusted our institutions. And here comes the thing. I think what we need today is to instill trust. There is a trust deficit in the world. And here I think the Nordic countries, coming back to Sweden after many years now abroad, we have a chance here to show that we can still mobilize support for the good forces and for strong institutions. I think institutions are the backbone of a decent and civilized society. And I remember these words of my father, and from then on, I saw my work in the international community also as being part of a country that is standing up for the same principles that should guide the international community. We should take away this artificial line between national and international. It is actually the same thing we work for. And by building a good state, then we create conditions so that war don't erupt. And that's why this model is so great of the SDG. Looking at my own thing here, but still, I was part of it, but the member states were fully behind, and they had no inclination to go for the lowest common denominator. It kept a very high ambition, very high demands now to deliver. And then comes the sustaining peace, saying that peace, security, and development and human rights are one. It's gospel.
But we cannot pretend that we don't have a serious backlash today.
No, of course.
Because we see those in a world where we have never had so many young people. Historically, the proportion of young people is very big, and at the same time, we see extremist, populist, protectionist forces gaining ground and actually talking against everything we believe in, those of us who are here. And I find this very, very worrying.
And we see that failure of trust, or that
absolutely,
deficit
and
of trust.
it's the ultimate expression of loss in trust. And also these are leaders who say that they are against sort of the elitism and the establishment, but they are themselves very wealthy, or So you think why can't we see through all?
Who are you thinking of when you say that?
No, but it's not only in one country. Unfortunately, this is happening around us, and we see even Europe breaking up. So in those days when Europe, as a representative of a community based on common values. And that's the strength of our cooperation, our European cooperation, also being in peril at the moment, and it's very, very worrisome. So I think those of us who want to see the world as in a different shape, we really have to make sure that we mobilize and that we organize our work and come together.
Hanan, you wanted to?
Yes, I want to add, there are basic requirements. Number one, never underestimate the power of a single force or country that can intervene and act on principle and actually speak truth to power. These are activist states like Sweden. You cannot be intimidated into silence. That's why we believe Sweden and the Security Council is very important for us. Sweden voting that Jerusalem is occupied is very important because it means you have not sacrificed principle and adherence to justice for the sake of self-interest. And you are not intimidated. So that's very important. But also I don't want to overestimate the power of the collective when it is intimidated or blackmailed, or the powerful states and components try to undermine the very structure and the very mandate of a global multilateral system, because they have power and they will wield it and they will use it, particularly when it comes to money. So I think you really need to be able to challenge this and to regain the trust, the confidence in multilateralism as not adopting multiple, not just double, but multiple standards, and that they have the will to intervene, and that within them it's not just a question of blackmail and pressure and threats, but that there are people who will speak out and who will try to maintain the integrity and standing of these institutions, particularly given, I agree with Margot, particularly given the global context in which we live. Not only do we see populism and misogyny and racism and xenophobia and Islamophobia and everything you want rising and gaining an audience. These are things that are being said in civilized societies, you know, that are acceptable now. Which weren't. I mean, there were sources of horror, but now things are being said and done that go against human rights and peace and, you know, civil behavior. And this is extremely crucial. But number two, we also see the emergence, I don't want to introduce a new complication, of extremist, ideological, fundamentalist, absolutist, religious-based forces. And this kind of language, where religion becomes the dominant driving force, guarantees that there will be no solution. Because if you bring God into the equation and you have absolute mandate, then it's absolutely sure that God will not compromise. Right? Neither your God, nor my God, nor anybody else's God. And I mean, we got rid of the divine right of kings and so on, but now we have really divine dispensation for groups and collectives and even countries that claim that religion gives them preferential treatment and gives them the right to decide absolutely.
Isabella, your answer to my first question to you brought out all the complexity. Right? Task isn't getting any more simple as they talk, is it?
No, it's certainly not. And I think, I mean, it's extremely important what you're highlighting here, what the backlash on populism, on extremism, on religious fanatism and sectarism that we see actually driving development in the completely wrong direction, and also leaders being very skillful in using the sectarism and the identity, the politics of identity, right? Which is quite the opposite of what you're saying, Jan, about we're all one, you know, we're one planet, and this planet is actually shrinking extremely much when it comes to how we're interlinked both economically, the ecosystems, and politically, and the effects of conflict is affecting us all. And I feel by the day, I feel like the responsibility and the weight almost of responsibility on us as a Swedish government, a feminist government, on the example that we actually represent. And in all the contexts and the conferences I'm in, everyone is pointing at us and saying, well, you really have the credibility, you can show by example that you can have an environmentally sustainable development and a growing economy, that you can have a feminist government and gender analysis on your budget and all of that, and have a really good economic development. And this is what the world needs right now. I mean, we can't just close our eyes, a blind eye on the degradation of the planet. We cannot close our eyes on the systematic discrimination of 50% of the population, which is the women. We cannot close our eyes on the serious abuses of human rights. But we've done this journey as our parents, Jan's father, and everyone has been a part of that. And this is, I think, the story that we need to tell. But what I wanted to say is, on conflict prevention and sustaining peace, of course, on the headlines is South Korea, it's Syria, it's the ongoing conflicts. But who will give credit to political leaders that would stop a conflict from erupt in a country who no one heard about and the conflict never erupted? That's, I think, the sticking point here. And I think that's why we need the involvement of the fragile states themselves. Their voice needs to be heard. We need the scientific community to be very clear. We need the civil society and the human rights organizations to be very, very clear on what needs to be done. Otherwise, some leaders will just, jump to the first best opportunity to send away some bomb planes to try, say that they are finishing off a conflict somewhere where they're actually not finishing anything, just starting something. And and we need to really make it completely everyday work in all these fragile contexts and conflict-affected states, that we need to work together with security, development, human rights, the political sphere. We need to work together. Otherwise, it will not work. And with the New Deal for Fragile States, we're going to discuss later on and the mechanism on a country level, because I think the UN is up here, the New York sphere is up here, but we need to make sure that it works on the ground, and then it can make a difference. Then the fragile states themselves need to be very actively engaged.
What I'm going to do in a moment is to ask for questions from the floor. I also wanted to give Uri and Jan a chance to come back, but Margot.
No, I just had a question. Maybe Sipri knows how to measure success. I mean, how do we measure if we are successful? Exactly what.
Dr. Gary Melante is somewhere in the audience, and he'll approach you afterwards with a one-page briefing on precisely that. Uri, did you?
Well, I think everybody was kind of concluding and said that what we really need, what we have seen that works, really, the just recent case of Gambia, when the population decided. We talk about ECOWAS and all the regional institutions, but the reality is the population have decided we have enough of this, and you can no longer stay in power. So to avoid the conflict, the regional organization, they have to come in place. And so civil society is highly, highly important. And now also another thing we need to understand that we all know already, you cannot have built anything, peace building, how we call it, peacekeeping, and even SSR become like a mere technical exercise if there's no viable political system. If the political system is there, not there, these are just exercises we are doing, and it just so that's the foundation for us to put the viable political system in place.
I think this is all part of getting organized for building the just and fair society.
This concept, sustaining peace, covers the whole range. Minister, you are absolutely right. It's prevention that is the absolutely crucial aspect. But also post-conflict work must be done in such a way that it doesn't start another conflict later on. So that's why it's such a beautiful concept. And by the way, we need to politically reward preventive work. You didn't get enough credit for the work on Gambia in the Security Council, but actually it could have been horribly. Yeah, but, and if there are any journalists here, I challenge you. Did you ever succeed in getting a headline in television or radio or newspaper saying that the disaster did not occur? So we need, both as media people and politicians, make sure that we reward prevention. But my point since I have a chance to say this, there is a lot of horror in the world. I hate the proxy wars around the world, Syria, the worst case. But still, and it's a bad picture. We have inequalities, we have horrible human rights violations, we have a complete disregard in many cases of humanitarian law. I came back and I was pretty depressed, so I asked myself, where do I see hope? And I see hope, and it's just wonderful to be in a panel with 4 strong women, I must say. I see a future where we will see the full emancipation of women. This will happen, must happen. If you see any signs in the different direction, it's because people are getting nervous who don't want this to happen. So that's number one. The second thing is youth. We commiserate about youth unemployment, rightly so. But when I go around schools and universities, which I now do more than before, I am filled with hope, and I realize one thing. We should not only work for young people, we need to learn to work with young people. Bring them into the discussion on jobs, on education, on employment, and their ideas about entrepreneurship. My granddaughter tells me more about this thing that I carry, teaches me more about this than anyone else. She's 10 years old. Every time she teaches me something new. 10 seconds. And then I stand there in awe. I just say this only as an example of how much we need to be with young people. We are in a hurry. We have an existential threat. On environment, they have so many ideas. And so that's my second hope. The third hope is knowledge, science and technology. We should get the scientific community on board for the implementation of the goals, much more than we do on health, climate, transport, anything. Get them on board. And last thing, I believe in international cooperation together. So these are my reasons for hope. Otherwise, we will get too depressed.
And they all work. Questions from the floor. We've got time to take a couple, and there is a roving mic. I can see a hand there. Would you say who you are when you talk? And then there was one in the middle, and that'll be the next one. And then one over the far side, and that'll be the third. And gosh, there's a gender coincidence is going to happen right now.
My name is Catherine Ronderos from the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom in Colombia. I'm glad to be here, and thank you for this very expert panel. And I think it was very clear for many of us that the women's perspective and gender analysis is very, very important for peace and world peace. And I think were my reflections on the Colombian process and hearing what you're saying about women's participation. Sometimes we need to go in more a deeper reflection about that, because we are feeling that we are now participating in many spaces where we weren't invited before, and we are participating and participating and participating and participating. Oh my God, non-stop. But, which is great, but where our voices are not reaching the high-level policies where where they need to be. It's just like there is also a glass ceiling for what we are requesting, so it's not enough. The participation is how we make our recommendations, our voices heard in a higher level that transform the policies that they need to be transformed. For example, the security part. This is a very important issue. And we have been saying that we don't want more arms, we don't want more military, we don't want women in the military, but because we're now facing a post-conflict scenario, then we need the military to provide security. And it's like, no, this is not the way we are building peace from a women's perspective. And this is challenging the center of the vision of peace and security from many countries. And that's why I disagree with the gentleman, that we actually need to take into the equation peace, development, and security all together. When we talk about women's participation, we are challenging that. So this is important.
Okay, thanks very much. Pass the mic back. And if you put your hand up again, yes. In fact, even stand, and then it's easier for it to get to you.
Thank you. My name is Elena Puch, and I'm the director of Build Up, which is a social enterprise that works on technology, arts, and peace building. And I also wanted to start by thanking CIPRI for putting together a panel that is not only majority women, but also so vocally feminist. I think at a time like now that is truly inspiring. So thank you for all your comments. And I think that, Dan, as well as having a gender coincidence, there's a bit of a coincidence in the kind of question that I have. Because Minister Wallström talked about how it's now about implementation. And you all mentioned the importance of participation. But I think participation is incredibly difficult to do in a meaningful way, in a way that actually addresses priorities. So my direct question is maybe the question at the end of that statement, which is basically how do we, what works to actually increase citizen participation in setting priorities for sustaining peace? Peace means different things for different people. So how do we actually get people's voices to set the priorities for sustaining peace in practical ways? Not just saying this needs to happen. We all agree it needs to happen. How does it happen?
Yeah. Thanks a lot. And there's a third question over here. I'm sorry, Kate, to be making you run the full width and length of the room.
Who was it?
Yeah. Completing the gender coincidence. It was pure coincidence, honest.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be in a gathering like this. I am from Uganda, particularly northern Uganda, and I'm sure many of you know LRA versus UPDF. My question or comment goes to the two honorable ministers of Swedish government. It's also still, again, women. And I want to confirm what the hidden sister or daughter is, that northern Uganda is a case where a woman's voice brought in peace, but it has never been talked about. We are mothers, we are wives, we are aunties, and we are sisters. I can assure you, in the context of Africa, a woman's voice is silent but very powerful. And we hold power in this world, but we are not recognized. My comment is, Sweden is part of the Security Council. There is this resolution called Mr. or Miss 1325. What is the practical implementation of that? Because we are not there in prevention of conflict, neither are we there at the platform of planning for peace building. So why is this resolution in place? Secondly, in peace operations, I'm not practically anywhere, so where is my position as a woman? Lastly, business is a big tool, but there is this element of human being, especially men, who enjoy doing business in fragile environment. What is your comment and what is our comment? Thank you.
Thank you very much for that question and for real, again, the relationship, security, peace and development, 1325, practical implementation, and the different roles, the different effects that peace can have. There is about a minute and a half for each of you to respond to that simple set of questions. So choose your points carefully and go for it. I've got a big clock in front of me, and you do too. And I think it's easiest if I just come along the bench like this. So I start with Uri, then Jan, and so on. So Uri first.
Yes. The first question, I really like it because it's the truth. Sometimes women, we are sitting there just to call, window shop, how you call it, to show that there are women representation. The typical case, I just came from a high-level meeting on terrorism. And I push and push. Finally, they wanted to present the gender aspect. And when I was there, it was to tell me exactly how to present it. And I was like, no, this is not how I want to present it. So, and what she said about the security, that our concept of security is different from what the politicians' version of security is, not like military. So the security is a social contract between the state and his people.
Right.
So security is completely different. Women see security differently than men. And talking about Resolution 1325, and most of the time we come in big forum, we talk about how to involve women and so on. The women who are struggling are not me, on my high heel and big education. The bottom line is I sat in a very big meeting in South Africa on Resolution 1325. They sat me with a civil society women group from Sudan. And these women, they didn't speak English, so they were asking, one woman was asking me a question. She said, what is, and she kept going. Finally, I was like, 1325. She said, yes. She wanted to know what is Resolution 1325. And we brought those women to display them, to say that Resolution 1325. But is it translating also to get to the level of the woman? Because we are not the women we should be worried about. Is the people really down there who are struggling with their daily life and who are at the margin and things like that. So we have to make it real and practical for them.
Great. Thanks, Harriet. Adarash, that's brilliant. Yeah.
We haven't reached far enough on 1325. It's 17 years ago it was established. I don't think it will become a reality unless men realize that this is in their own interest, that this becomes a men issue also. Olof Palme, whom I worked with and Margaret worked with, and you know very well, of course, Hanan, he was once presented with a draft speech to a conference, a women's conference, and it was a rather, he felt, a boring title. It said, "The importance of the emancipation of women." And Palme looked at the speechwriter and said, "You don't understand. You don't understand. What is it? What's the problem?" He said, "Well, you should change that title, The Importance of Emancipation for Man, of Man. Both men and women have to accept this as the best way to develop our societies in the direction we've been talking about here." And it is really, truly great to sit with 4 women of this quality and sending that message. Also, I want to remind you of another resolution, which I don't want to have the fate of 1325, 17 years from now. It is Resolution 2250, which is about youth. It's actually the equivalent of the 1325 for young people, to bring young people into peace processes. I've been mediating in 6 different conflicts. I have always brought women in my own delegation to show the other side that women have to be part of it. But I can tell you, in none of these 6 negotiations have I seen a woman on the other side in decisive negotiating positions. This is a shame. So I think we have to set a good example. I think the fact that you dare go out in the world and talk about a feminist government and a feminist policy, which people sometimes frown upon. I remember some situation in the past, but you're on the right track. And we, all of us in this room, of whatever gender we have, must support it.
Thank you very much. Hannah.
I think 1325 should also be married to CEDAW. And I think that all countries have to present their country reports and their shadow reports, or the real human reports, in order to gauge and to measure how countries are complying with the requirements of 1325 and with CEDAW. Because these are issues that have to be incorporated within the legal system and institutionally and structurally within the public domain as well as within the popular domain. I would like to pick up where you left off, Jan, because I believe that we need alliances. Women's issues are not solely the responsibility of women. And this is what's always been done, especially in third world countries. We will set up a Ministry of Women's Affairs and you go and play there. And then we are all free. We don't have to be held accountable. We don't have to deal with women's issues because we have a ministry there that deals with women's issues, and it starts acting like another NGO and public awareness and so on. You need women with power, and to exercise power, you need to infiltrate every aspect: economic, political, party lines, everywhere. Community leaders, local government elections. We need to engage, and we need to have affirmative action. I know that this is old language, but it still works. Affirmative action is needed, minimal percentages are needed, alliances, networks, and you need an alliance between women and youth. That is the most logical alliance, but also civil society actors, human rights activists, and so on. And you need allies among decision makers. It is, of course, bottom up, but you also need to have a feminist government. You need to have up-down people who will intervene and take decisions to have women at the decision-making level, and not, as my friend from WILF and others said, women as tokens or symbolic and so on. It's not just a glass ceiling. It's a system of exclusion and exclusivity in many ways. And so long as men feel that they have something to lose rather than gain by including women, they will not act.
So then, to two women at the decision-making level. Isabella first, and then Margaret.
Well, I think it's really interesting because when you first pointed out that we were like a majority of women in the panel, I hadn't even thought about it. and everyone is making a big point out of that we are many women here, and from our perspective, we are 50-50 men, women in the government. We don't only have women in the women's ministry, but the foreign ministry has all women on the ministers and state secretaries and so on. So I think that's also important to keep in mind that it is possible, and I think most of us, for us, it's just a normal daily way of thinking that you need to always have a gender balance. However, I did think about a very skewed non-gender balance when I saw a picture of a very influential gentleman signing a bill wanting to exclude any financing to sexual and reproductive health and rights from any organization in the world working of giving a sexual and I mean that picture with only men standing behind the president of the US signing the global gag rule, that was really in our face. And I think what we're seeing, the backlash on women's rights, this is really at the heart of women's possibility of participation.
But you had an alternative photo.
I did, and that was also my let's say my normal staff standing behind me.
So come clean. That was deliberate, wasn't it?
Of course.
Come on.
Well, it was a very important bill and a very important women standing behind me. So anyway, this, if women cannot have the knowledge of on contraceptives or the access to safe abortions, then we will see women continuing to be married off at a very early stage, not continuing going to school, not being able to go to university, not being able to participate, and not being able to educate their own children on women's rights and gender equality, and really reproducing poverty and ignorance generation after generation. So sexual reproductive health and rights is really at the core also of women's participation. We've had that development in Sweden, the right to abortion, the right to the child care has been really the fundamental possibilities for women to participate in the social and political life. So
you need legislation also.
You need legislation. I mean, but it's not only about women being able to cast a vote or so on. But if you cannot really control your reproduction, then it's really not going to happen. Thank you.
Margaret.
Thank you. We implement a feminist foreign policy. It means that we check 3 R's. We check rights. Do women enjoy the same rights? Or is there discriminatory legislation, for example? We check representation. Are they around the table? Are they in the government? Are they represented where important decisions are being made? And thirdly, we check against resources. Are resources and money and budget also attributed to women and women's needs? And those work perfectly well. Not only for us, it works around the world. So for Uganda or for any other country, this could also be the kind of principles that you use to check whether you are able to deliver on a feminist foreign policy. We have every year a national action plan, and this is in turn carried out by all our embassies around the world, and they do everything from work against genital mutilation, female genital mutilation, to actually arranging seminars or helping countries to write new laws, and also working against violence against women. So this is how we do it. Where are the women in the Security Council? Well, that's exactly the question we have to ask every week. Where are the women? Are they mentioned in mandates or in mandate renewals? Are they there as peacekeepers or police or in peacekeeping operations or in peace building? Are they there around the table? Are they here in the room in the Security Council? We invited for the first time women from Somalia, women from civil society that were invited to the Security Council to give witness or testify in front of the Security Council. We make sure that we are consistent in every situation, country situation, that we ask, where are the women? Are they, do they enjoy the same rights? Are they represented? Can we direct resources also to their needs? Are they listened to? That's how we do it in the everyday work in the Security Council. And then we, of course, bilaterally, through our development assistance, everything that Isabella does has this as the lens through which we look at it. Colombia is an example of where women had to fight for their seats in the peace negotiations, where they've done a fantastic job, but I have no comfort to give. You will have to continue to fight. It will never be a given or something that is granted. You will have to continue to fight for it, I hope with the help from us, which we are trying to contribute now. And maybe the only comfort is that I can say, look at it not as a glass ceiling, but as a thick layer of men, as my friend Laura Liz would say. then you know how you can tackle it as well.
May I ask why resources, UN Women gets about 1% of the UN budget as opposed to everything else? We were
It's all
told that.
extra budgetary. And
We've got to keep our eye on the clock.
And this is a very important issue from now on. You know, will there be money for UNFPA for work on exactly protecting women's rights?
But
and
our
looking
friend
after
has stopped funding UNFPA, and that's a tool.
Yeah, this
used
will be
by
very difficult.
misogynists,
And also UN Women and other organizations that defend women's rights in particular will be under attack. So it's important that we get organized, but we also have to get down to the proper content of politics, and that is really these issues: rights, representation, and resources. Well, maybe you have more R's that you want to add, but this is where it starts. And still, through the World Bank, we know that more than 100 countries around the world have legislation that stops women from entering certain jobs and professions also. Even European countries have those laws and legislation. So there's a lot more to do.
And so to the final word to Mamadou Kagbo.
Well, actually, for me, my worldview, the independence of a woman, progress of a woman was shaped by my mother, who I lost my father very early. And in the traditional sense, another brother was supposed to inherit my mother. And she said no. And she moved out of the house and set up base. Now, with education, getting close to her, my understanding of the world, I can see how she gained her independence. First, she belonged to the Osusu. This is a small microcredit organizations among women. So she had capital to do her business, to take care of her children. So she didn't need my uncles, let them go away. And my mother always dealt with the local tribes people, the tribal headman. So to that, I see that was her protection. You understand?
Yeah.
And so he will canvass for their election. So my mother was a politician and used the politicians to protect herself. And my mother pushed me. If you write A as big as this room, my mother cannot say it. But she made sure I went to school. All my sisters went to school, to the point that she even walked. That her local women she was working with, she made sure the literacy program was brought in. Now, that is my understanding. My wife, in conclusion, my wife says to me, you know, the good thing about you is you're a kind of quiet person. He said, but you are as arrogant as your mother. And I say, do you mean assertive or arrogant? Which are you playing with? In other words, in all of this, no matter what we do, women have got to be assertive. That is my own worldview of all of what I see, and that's what I picked from my mother.
We've run over by about 10 minutes, so I guess we'll start the next sessions 5 minutes late. We'll start the next sessions immediately on time. Do not expect to have a rest or a break during the coffee break either. It's for networking as much as refueling with coffee. I think this has been a wonderful kickoff to the forum. Please join me in again thanking our 6 fantastic panelists.
Great seeing you.
Thank you for providing the water.
Helen, great seeing you.
Lovely to see you.